items in the pouch in front of you.
Have a safe and informative journey.
Hello, I'm Nathan Hartman, and this is Dreamfinders, a podcast about the creative culture of Disney theme parks. Disney fans find all sorts of ways to celebrate their favorite rides and attractions. Some use paint, others video, and today's guest uses words. But she's not writing about the history of the parks like others. No, Sophie Jo strings words together to create poetry about the park closest to her, Disneyland Paris. While sometimes maligned, Sophie has a passion for the Paris park and has written all about it in her poetry book, Kids Grown Up, where she explores both her favorite areas of the park and Disney characters that inspire and intrigue her. We chat all about her first experience at Phantom Manor at age 6, how Disney makes her happy cry, and why she loves Stinky Pete from Toy Story 2. To note, our chat about Phantom Manor was recorded before it reopened with a brand new backstory, so keep that in mind as you listen. All of that and more is coming right up on Dreamfinders. Sophie Jo, welcome to Dreamfinders.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So we've interviewed all sorts of artists on Dreamfinders, but you're our first Disney-loving poet. Where did you grow up and how did you first get into Disney?
So I'm from England and I grew up in the centre of England. I still live here now. So we are literally like the furthest you can be from the sea anywhere in the whole of the country. So literally like right in the centre. So I don't know if you guys know sort of Birmingham and the West Midlands, but I tend to just tell people like near London. It's not that near London, but it tends to be what people hear. And then they're like, oh, great. Yeah, I know London. So I, as I say, grew up there. I'm still here now. And I guess with Disney, it kind of started, well, I suppose for most people, it started when they were a kid, because I suppose there's not really a kid alive who doesn't know of Disney or, you know, enjoy Disney to some degree, if they've been, you know, able to see it or to watch it or whatever else. Mm-hmm. So I think, and, you know, my parents, when I was a kid, they'd always be like, oh, you know, we're not, you know, when people say, well, were you part of a Disney family? Do you have like a Disney family? My parents would always be like, no, we're not a Disney family. But they literally every photo we have of us as children, me and my brother, it's like there's a Mickey t-shirt, there's like a Mickey plate, there's a lot of Disney. So I think it probably started quite organically, quite naturally. But then as I got older, we started to go to Disney parks. Well, Paris specifically, we went to Paris a lot. And I just loved it. And I think it's one of those things that a lot of people feel that you will grow out of. And I think my parents were like, you know, maybe she will. And it just really didn't happen. So if anything, the love has just grown.
After a little research, and you have a website and a blog people can check out, it's clear that you have a real love, as you said, for Disneyland Paris. When was your first trip there?
So I went there for the first time in 1996. So I was born in 1990. Obviously, Disneyland Paris opened in 1992. So when I went for the first time, it had been open for 4 years. And I just remember loving it. I just remember kind of walking in and just being like, this is crazy. And it was not what I expected either. I remember walking in and saying to my mom, like, you know, I have no idea what this is going to be like. I really couldn't picture what a Disney park would look like, what would be in there, the kind of like attractions and rides that would be there. And it was just like, it was better than anything I could ever have, imagined or thought of. And I just loved it. And then after that, I think my mom was kind of like, okay, well, we've done that now, you know, well, where else shall we go? And every single year I was like, quite like to go back to Disneyland. So like, it sort of started off with this kind of one trip. And then after that, we did go to other places, because I think she was like, should we go somewhere else? Should we try somewhere different? But yeah, it just kind of ended up that like every single opportunity I had, I was like, please, can we go back? I just adored it.
That's really cool. Was there a moment or a specific trip or a show or some instance that you feel like a switch was flipped? Like you went from someone who goes to Disney to like a Disney obsessive?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously going as a kid, I guess, I don't know if there's something to do with the the nostalgia of it. So I guess obviously having been as a child and really, really enjoyed it and wanted to return, I think maybe when you go back, when you're slightly older, you have a different outlook on it, and maybe you kind of think back to when you were a kid and you think, oh, I remember coming here, I remember doing this. So I don't know if that was it as well. So kind of, I think when I went on the trip in 2006, it would have been, so that was when I was about 16. And it was like, obviously I'd loved the trips before and really fallen in love with the place, but I think going back on that visit, I just was like, this is crazy. Like, I just absolutely adored it, and I couldn't stop thinking about it when I came back. And I think that was probably it. And obviously that when you get to a certain age, I think as well, as a teenager, I think I'd spent a couple of years sort of like age 13, 14. Like, there are a bunch of films that I missed from those kind of years because I was a bit like, oh, I'm too old for it now. And I kind of was, I think rebelling against it a little bit and felt like I couldn't really enjoy it maybe. And then I think I went to Paris when I was about 16 and was just like, actually, no, I take it all back. I still adore it.
You write on your blog something that I think is very interesting about being a fan of Disneyland Paris. So I want to read this sentence from your blog. If you're a DLP fan, you'll know what I mean. It's a regular occurrence that Brenda from down the road, who has never stepped foot in our beloved Parisian resort, will tell you it's not a patch on Florida, and you will seethe silently while trying really hard to not burst into tears. What makes you feel that way? There is I think that people who love Disneyland Paris are very, very defensive about their love of Disneyland Paris. Why do you think you have to be defensive about it?
I think and I mean, obviously I can't speak about Florida because I've never been. So I do think that plays a part in it as well. Whereas obviously people who have been to both resorts would be far better placed, I guess, to talk about both. But I think for me, it's not so much that people dislike Paris or anything like that. I think it's just that it tends to be English people, I think, who have been to Florida but haven't been to Paris. They almost kind of write it off. So sometimes you'll meet somebody who, at work or wherever else, and they've been to Florida sort of 2-3 times, and you'll be like, oh yeah, I've been to Paris. I love Paris. And their first reaction is like, oh well, no, like don't waste your time there. Get yourself to Florida. So I think that's partly to do with it. And I think people feel sometimes that Paris is kind of like, not the same size, not in America. So it kind of, not that it doesn't count, I guess, but I think that sometimes if you've been to Paris a lot and you've seen all of like the magic that Paris has to offer, you kind of just feel like, oh, please don't discount it. Like, please do visit and enjoy it because it is incredible.
Now, British people are known for their love of trips, as you said, to Disney World. Mm-hmm. And I've had other British people on, and I've always asked them sort of this general question. I'm fascinated by that culture of tourism. How have you not had the opportunity yet to come down here, and why do you think so many people do?
I think for me personally, because I went to Paris obviously so many times as a child, I guess it's kind of like Paris is on my doorstep, so it always kind of ended up being like that. And then I think I got so into it that I was just like, oh, I have to go back to Paris. And I really, like, I went for sort of 4 or 5 years annually for about 7 years. So it's not ridiculously expensive. Obviously, it's much cheaper for me to go to than Florida, for example. Mm-hmm. But it was still expensive enough that I wasn't able to kind of consider both, if that makes sense.
Sure.
But I think, for a lot of people, they would, as I say, go straight over to Florida. I think for me, the reason that I haven't done it, as I say, is that interest in Paris, which kind of meant that for a long time, I kind of was like, no, I'll stick with Paris. It's fine. My parents took my brother before I was born. In their defense, they won the trip. So they went on a cruise and then they did Florida as well. So there are some amazing photos from that. They went in 88, I think. And like, they absolutely loved it. And I was always like, oh, could you not have waited a few years? But it's fine. They had no control over that trip. So, but yeah, I think a lot of people, I think, would go straight over to to Florida and maybe not even consider Paris. But I suppose there's that kind of view that it's so big, there's so much to do there. And actually, you know, from England, it's really not that far away. Whereas I guess like, you know, the adverts that we see on TV here over in the UK, it will be Paris or, you know, or we'll have Florida advertised to us. For example, we would never see any kind of adverts for Disneyland over in California, which I guess makes sense.
Well, it certainly makes sense, but you've been to Disneyland, correct?
I have, yeah, I have. Which, yeah, that kind of doesn't make sense. Like, well, why have you been there, Sophie, but not to Florida? But I genuinely think it's just the way it's worked out. So I did like a big trip over to California in September last year, and just kind of had a lot of things that I wanted to do and see there. And it just so happened that obviously Disneyland was one of them. So I just spent the day there. Would have loved to have done more, but I guess it's a good excuse to go back. But yeah, no, Florida is like absolutely on the bucket list. I do feel like it's kind of wrong. It's kind of wrong that I haven't been. So fingers crossed. I'm thinking 2020, and I asked my mom as well because she's due to retire then, and she was like, "Yeah, amazing. It can be my retirement trip. I'll come with you." So that's what I'm thinking.
Brilliant. So you mentioned that you went to Disneyland, and I want to talk a little bit about that because you write a little bit about that on your website. And what was that experience like for you? Because it feels like you, as you said, you had this massive love for Disneyland Paris, but this desire to sort of go to the park where Walt walked.
Yeah.
What did you find? What were the first impressions, and then also like what differences did you find between the two parks that were culturally very different?
I mean, I loved it. I think I was not nervous, but I kind of had it in the back of my mind thinking, well, how's it going to be when I walk around? Like, am I going to feel at home there? Because I think for a lot of Disneyland Paris fans, if we're, going all the time, if we're able to spend a lot of time there, I think that some of the, I guess, appeal of it is that you walk in, and that's the same for anybody, I guess, in, with any kind of home park, is that you walk in and you think, yes, I'm home. It feels so familiar, where everything is. And I think that's a really nice feeling. So I was kind of thinking like, oh, this is really weird that I'm going to be going to like a Disney park and I'll be walking around and I won't know where things are. And but it was also really, really exciting. But I sort of studied the park maps in quite a lot of detail before we went, just because I was so excited. But to the point where, we were walking through and I knew, where everything was, and I kind of had a good general mind map in my head of where things were. So actually, after being there like 2-3 hours, I was like, this is so weird because it feels as homely as Paris does, which was really nice. I mean, obviously there are similarities in some ways and differences in others. I think the weirdest thing for me was when I went into the Red Rose Tavern, and it was just bizarre because there's a restaurant, like a counter service restaurant in Paris. I don't know if you've been, called Au Chalet de la Marionnette.
Sadly, I've not been, but yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it's crazy because like that's all Pinocchio themed, and then I walked into Red Rose Tavern and I was like, oh, this is crazy. Like it's exactly the same, but it's Beauty and the Beast themed, and like things like that. I always forget that they kind of those similarities, but things like that, yeah, it was crazy. And obviously going on to attractions and seeing the differences there. So say like It's a Small World, for example. I love that ride with all my heart, but again, it was crazy kind of seeing the original Disneyland, It's a Small World, and sitting on the boat on that attraction and just thinking like, this is crazy. This is like, because this is where it all came from. This is not a kind of a change to an original attraction. This is not something that's been brought to another park. Like this is the ride. It just blew my mind. It was crazy.
Something you mentioned quite a bit is that you're a happy crier. I think it's in your bio, in fact. How does Disney bring out the happy crier in you?
Honestly, I think Disney brings out the happy crier in me more than anything or anyone else. I don't know. I think I'm just quite an emotional person. So if I'm sad about something, I will also cry quite easily. But I think happy crying, it's just, I don't know. If I feel very emotional about something, it just, the tears just flow. And I think in a Disney park, it's partly because I genuinely feel so happy when I'm there. So it's kind of a natural reaction. But then I think there's also just a massive appreciation for the work and the effort and the detail that's gone into everything there. Like, it happens all the time. Like, sometimes I'll just be watching like a Disney Parks video and it will be, it kind of skips and it will go onto a video of Walt talking about like Carousel of Progress, and I'm just thinking, oh my God, like it just I will honestly be there and I'll get a bit tearful. And I'll sort of be there like, oh, I love you.
You're gonna have buckets of tears if you ever get down here and actually go to Carousel of Progress.
Yeah, it would be insane. I do think I would have to take like so many tissues with me. But yeah, I think it's that. I think it's that that appreciation, I guess, of what Walt created, and kind of the legacy that he's left, and all of the hard work and the effort put in by the Imagineers and everybody else who works on the park. So I think it's kind of like a double-sided thing.
So we've talked a lot about Disney creativity. Let's talk a little bit about yours. When did you get into writing?
I think because I've always been a reader. Like when I was a kid, my parents would always be like, oh, she's a bookworm. And I'd be like, oh, don't say that. It's not cool. So I always tried to sort of like, I'm not kind of embarrassed of it, but I think you get to an age when you're a bit older, a bit like for me with Disney, where I was kind of like, do I really want to be sort of shouting about this? And then I got older and I thought, actually, do you know what? This is something that I really, really love. And then I think it was probably... I've always enjoyed writing, like when I was at school and stuff like that. I was like the kid who was good at English, but really bad at maths and science. So I've always been like, I think my brain works in a certain way and not so well in another way. And then when I graduated, I just kind of started writing more, really just for fun. So kind of just like blog posts that I'd kind of posted on a blog that nobody saw. Little bits in notepads here and there, and just thought, actually, I really enjoy this. I'm not sure what I could do with it or if there's even, any point to it, but I'm just going to go with it and see how it goes. And then started to kind of to blog and to write that way. And then with the poetry specifically, I honestly don't even know where that came from. Like, I genuinely, like, the first poem that I wrote in ever was a Disney one, and that's the first poem that comes in the Kids Grown Up book, so my Disney inspired poetry book. And I genuinely, like, I think I wrote that in my head as I was driving home from work, because the scenario in it had actually happened, and it just kind of, I just sort of started, I don't know if it was like a therapeutic thing, I'm not sure. And then I thought, actually, I quite like that, I'm going to write that down. And then it kind of just sort of sparked from there.
What poets do you find inspire your work?
I think for me, the kind of poetry that I tend to read, it differs. So I wouldn't say that there's anything kind of related to Disney that's particularly inspired me. When I was a kid, my mom used to read this book to me called Roald Dahl's Revolting Rhymes.
Oh, yes.
Which which sounds bizarre, but genuinely, like, the poems in that were incredible, and they were illustrated by Quentin Blake, who I really love. When I think of Roald Dahl, I think of Quentin Blake instantly. And those poems, they just stuck with me. Like, she read me quite a lot of stuff as a kid, I think just like before bed, and we kind of go through it when we were in the car and stuff, because we'd remember them, so we'd recite them. And I think that's where a lot of the rhyming poetry inspiration probably came from, whereas the the stuff that I tend to read myself now tends to be maybe less that kind of style. So there's a poet that I really love called Charlie Cox, and again, it's nothing Disney related at all. She mostly writes about mental health and kind of being a woman in the 21st century. She's absolutely not linked in terms of topic, but I do find it's really cool to read what other people are writing and pick up inspiration from that.
So let's talk a little bit about your Disney-based poetry book, Kids Grown Up.
Okay.
And then, if you're game, I'd love to have you read a few from the book as well. Yeah,
that's fine.
What made you want to compile the book?
So I think there were a few people online who had sort of said, we really enjoy it. We really like your poems, and we'd really love it if you put something together. And when you kind of think like, well, I don't know if if they'd be just being nice, or they just kind of saying, "Oh yeah, sure, we'd buy your book." I was like, "Would you? Would you really?" But then I had about, I think, 30 copies printed to begin with, and just thought, well, I'll put a few online. I wasn't selling them. I just asked people to make a donation to charity, and just sort of thought I'll leave it at that. But actually, they went, and a lot of people came back to me and said, "Well, now that's done, are you going to start actually selling them?" And I was like, "Oh, that there is kind of an interest in them, and I think people would be up for buying them." So I went back and I had some more printed, and it kind of has just grown from there, really.
That's really cool. Now, if you would do us the honor, could you read the first poem in the collection? I believe this is the titular Kids Grown Up.
Yes, yeah, it is, and it's the first one, the first poem, kind of that I'd written. So I always feel like it's like the baby. So yeah, this one is called Kids Grown Up, and in the actual poetry book, every poem has kind of like a little bracket underneath it. So this one is Kids Grown Up, bracket, shut up, Mike. Canteen man has a lunchbox. It's plastic, grey or brown. It doesn't make him happy, and it doesn't make him frown. It just is, full of sandwiches, and lunches are okay. There's nothing bad about them, but there's nothing that would say this is fun, because it isn't, and that isn't what I like. That's why my lunch bag's red and bold and really, really bright and full of Disney smiling faces that make people want to say, "You told me she was 20-something just the other day." I mean, I'm really close to 30 if you think about it, Mike. I'm 27, and there's so much stuff I like that was supposed to lose my interest back in 2003, except it didn't. And here we are, I guess, and Minnie Mouse is on my dress, and Hero H is on my lunch, and Judgy Mike, oh thanks a bunch, because your very grown-up way of being grown up every day, it makes me think of Peter Pan, of nurseries, pirates, then I can think happy thoughts, and fly, and thank my second star that I take joy in stuff like how to store my cheese baguette, and how to pour my childlike self into the day, and Mike won't quite get what I say, but adults are only kids grown up. Adults are only kids grown up. Adults are only kids grown up.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. It feels really weird reading it out. I've kind of done it. I do it when I write them sometimes, and I'm like, yeah, I think that works, but I've never actually properly read them out. But apparently that's what poets are meant to do. You're meant to get yourself to readings and stuff. So I feel like this is a good intro for me.
Good. Let's talk a little bit about that parentheses, right? Shut up, Mike. You speak of this Mike throughout the book, of course. What sort of attitude do you think Mike embodies for you?
I think, because Mike is a completely made up person. There's another poem about a couple of people at work who are very judgy about people's vacation habits called Sue and Rob, and they're completely made up too. So just as a disclaimer, it's not anyone specific. But I think, yeah, as you say, it's someone that embodies, I guess, what Disney fans have come to expect, but also don't like. So it's, I think, people who are maybe a bit judgmental about the things that you like or the things that you do. But I think also just somebody who maybe, like Mike's there with his lunchbox. It's grey, it's brown, it's kind of dull. And, I genuinely did have, it's a bit grotty now, so I can't use it anymore, but I did have a big Hero 6 lunch bag. And it was amazing. I loved it. But you will take it to work, and it always surprises me the amount of people who will be like, "Oh, why have you got that? You don't have kids. How is that yours?" And you kind of think, does it really matter? Does it impact your day? And I think deep down, I know you want a big Hero 6 lunch bag, or there's something else, from your childhood or from now. You would love a Doctor Who bag, or you'd love socks with your Harry Potter house on them. But I think there's certain people that will roll with that, and other people are just no, I'm a grown up, I refuse. And I think that's, I don't know, it's kind of sad. So yeah, I feel bad for Mike in some ways, but also I kind of think, come on, Mike, sort it out, get yourself your own lunch bag that makes you happy instead of just one that's there.
Do you think that attitude is changing? I feel like culture in a way is sort of moving towards, and I think nostalgia can be dangerous a little bit if people get stuck in it, but at the same time, there seems to be this desire to sort of enjoy and share things that made you happy when you were young. Do you think that there's a culture shift occurring?
I think so, yeah. And I think that things are, I think, as you say, maybe more widely accepted now, even just in the sense that we've seen, the Marvel universe grow. I mean, that's always been huge, but even thinking back to when I was a teenager, like my favorite show ever is The OC. And I don't know if you ever watched that, but like Seth Cohen, one of the main characters on that, he kind of, his interest and the sort of stuff that he likes, the comic books and that, it's very kind of looked down on still, even when that first came out, 2003. And I think he was partly responsible for, in that area, having maybe kind of encouraging a more accepting viewpoint of certain kind of, I guess, like nerd culture. I don't know if that's the right phrase for it, but I think, as you say, it's growing. I think more people are letting themselves enjoy things that they enjoy, rather than feeling like they have to maybe cut something out of their life because it's not suitable for them, or it's for kids or whatever else. But yeah, I think you're right in terms of the nostalgia thing. I think you can go too far with that as well. Like I always think there's that really interesting quote from Harry Potter. Do you remember where Dumbledore says it doesn't do to dwell on dreams and forget to live? I always think that's really kind of probably more powerful than Dumbledore thought, because whenever I hear that, I think that's so true. Like I always used to have to tell myself that about Disney parks as well, because it used to get to a point where I'd think, oh, I miss them so much and I feel terrible, and but it got to the point where I kind of wasn't enjoying general life. And I think you have to kind of regulate it, don't you, if you can, and try and think, I'd always rather be in a Disney park. But that said, I can't be so nostalgic for last year's trip or the trip from 10 years ago that I'm not kind of taking the time to enjoy myself just in the now and a kind of daily life.
Could you read for us Phantom Manor, then the Mesa Frontierland? Yeah,
sure. That's the last one. Okay, so Phantom Manor, then the Mesa Frontierland. The noises fade out as we walk. Magnificent 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, nothing. Another land almost, where a music box is always playing, where the wind is always whistling, just a little. Things are still here, but that's what tells you something lives. If we stare hard enough, if we're quiet enough, that window, it might show us. Worth a try. Beauty was here once, and again. Look up, that's her. I learned the name when I was small. Melanie Ravenswood. Are you thinking of hands emerging from walls, fake blood, fake shrieks? You're wrong. This is different. This is the best thing you ever saw.
Tell us a little bit about your fascination with Phantom Manor and Haunted Mansion in general.
Oh, it's just the best. I think Phantom Manor, I've always loved it. I haven't always loved it. The first time I ever went on that attraction, my first trip ever to Paris, I was 6, and I remember going into the stretching room there, and I thought that was the attraction. I thought that was it. I didn't realize that took you to the attraction. And I just remember crying and just saying to my mom, I'm really scared and I don't like this ride. It's scary and boring. And my mom was like, just chill out. Like, we'll be there soon. But for whatever reason, I was not into it as a 6-year-old, which I now think is awful, because 28-year-old me would be very angry with 6-year-old me for not appreciating the stretching room for what it is. But yeah, so I just love it. I think when I was about 22, 23, when I just graduated, kind of in the height of all of the Tumblr, the Disney blogs on Tumblr and Tumblr in general, really. I feel like it's not as well used now by the Disney community, but for a time it really was. So I had a blog on there called I Love Disneyland Paris. So I used to spend a fair bit of my day, because I was job hunting and not a lot else, talking with fellow Disneyland Paris fans on there. And we would talk a lot about the Phantom Manor backstory, which I think, it differs from fan to fan, because some people say, there isn't really one, you're reading too much into it. And I think there's a Tony Baxter quote where he says something like, "It's just Phantom Manor, calm down." Like it's not as much as maybe some people would like it to be. But I think that's the most exciting part, is that you can say, well, I saw that outside, and when I went over to Boot Hill and I was reading these, these tombstones, there was this and here, and somebody said that there's a ring buried in the ground, and is that the case in Paris as well, or is that just in another? It's I think that is where for me it gets really exciting, because there's the backstory and just everything that goes with that. Like, I don't know if you've seen so as I say, Boot Hill, which is on the left as you come out of Phantom Manor, and as you walk up to there, you can see all of the tombstones. So kind of in a similar way to the other to the Haunted Mansions, but that just is incredible to me, because there's so much effort put in there, and I think it's everything that goes with it. I just think it's like Imagineering at its absolute finest, in the sense that you can get so much from it as it is, but you can also read so much into it. And I guess probably because of the way I am and my kind of crazy imagination and like the writing I like to do alongside it, I think that probably sparks quite a lot for me. Like, I wrote a poem actually about the Phantom Manor backstory, but it's the longest one I've ever written, so I probably shouldn't read that one out, because we'd be here for like an hour.
What attracts you to the bride in Phantom Manor and her story?
Oh, I don't even know. I suppose the fact that she is. I'm floundering with this answer now. I don't know. I feel like it would be really cool to say I relate to her in some way, but I don't. It
might be good that you don't relate to her in some way too.
Yeah, I was gonna say she's a bit Miss Havisham, isn't she? Yeah, no, I think I don't know if I do specifically with her. I think it's everything. I think it's all of it. It's everything that pieces together. So it's her, but then it's her parents, Henry and Martha, and they're buried outside, and then there's the different kind of townspeople of Thunder Mesa, and I think it's everything that comes together. And I also love that, there's the backstory, or so it says, the backstory kind of links to the rest of Frontierland, which is this town of Thunder Mesa, and I just think that's really cool. So in Paris, like, there's Big Thunder Mountain, obviously, which is on this little island really close to Phantom Manor, and it's meant to be that, well, again, so the rumors go, is there's this backstory which is about Melanie, the bride in Phantom Manor. It's to do with her parents, and her dad came to Thunder Mesa and was mining in Big Thunder Mountain, and he was warned not to. So it kind of, everything starts from there. So I think that's what I love the most about it, is that you're able to just pick up on all of these different stories, and they're really just really immersive, I guess, which I love. It just sets all my kind of creative tendencies going.
Let's switch things up a little bit, and I want to talk about another poem that you wrote called I Changed My Thoughts on Masculinity. So if you could, will you set this one up for us before you read it?
Yeah, of course. So this one is basically like a rhyming letter from Stinky Pete, who was in Toy Story 2, to Woody, because obviously at the end of Toy Story 2, they decide that it is time for Stinky Pete to learn the real meaning of playtime. So off he goes with Amy, who is an artist. I think it's Barbie who says that. And obviously Barbie's got this makeup on her face. She's had drawing on her, and that's what is going to happen to Pete. So my thinking is actually like, that might have been really fun. That might not have been the worst possible thing that could have happened to him. He might have had an absolute blast. So that was the thinking behind it. Because I think when I started writing the poems, it was more, I focused more on characters and maybe how certain characters would feel. And as it's progressed, I probably do less of that, and maybe more focusing now on the parks and how the parks make people feel. But yeah, this was one of the first ones that I wrote that was more character focused. So it's called I Changed My Thoughts on Masculinity, and it's a letter from Stinky Pete. Woody, I know you tried your hardest to mess things up for me. You gave me to a fledgling artist, then laughed for all to see. But here's the scoop for Andy's toys, who seem to hate museums. Makeup and hair's also for boys. I wish that you could see him. There's Stu, the fluffy polar bear, whose fur has been dyed pink. And Barbie's boyfriend plats my beard. It really makes you think. I've had a blast in Amy's room. It suits me here, you see. Just wanted all of you to know you've got no friend in me.
It's so fun, and I what I love is that it gives insight and some thoughts on a character that is a bit of a tragic figure, one might even say, in Stinky Pete.
I really love him though.
Tell us why you like Stinky Pete so much.
I don't even know. I just think he's very sweet. He's one of he's not, obviously his character's not sweet, but he's sweet in the sense that if I could have him as a plush, I would. And I don't think I've ever seen a Stinky Pete plush. But yeah, he's there's something quite funny about him. And I think as well, obviously, when Pixar used to do the bloopers, I always really laughed at the bit at the end. You know, when he's talking to the Barbies, and he says he thinks he can get them apart in Toy Story 3. I just remember laughing at that loads when I was a kid. So I think because I saw that kind of extra side where obviously they're kind of acting as if they've been acting the whole time, I think that gave me another kind of layer to his personality. So perhaps I've been more forgiving of him than I should have been. Who's to say?
Do you have a love for Disney animation, and what are your favorites?
Oh, that's so difficult. I think yes, for sure. I think for me, it's really difficult to pick an absolute favorite. I think for kind of classic / nostalgic reasons, when I was a little girl, my favorites were always The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast, and I do think they're still incredible. They just take me back to being super small, and just being absolutely obsessed with Ariel and Belle. I loved them. And I think in terms of kind of Pixar, Ratatouille, which I think sometimes can be an unusual choice, but I love the film, but I do also think that it reminds me of Paris, obviously because of where it's set, but then also because they opened the Ratatouille themed area in Walt Disney Studios Park in Paris a while back, and so now when I go to that, it's kind of they're linked. So when I hear the Ratatouille soundtrack as well, that takes me right back to Paris. So I think that's definitely a favorite of mine as well.
Let's finish up with one last poem, Windows and Doors. So tell us what this poem is all about before you give us the read.
Sure. So this one I wrote, I'm trying to think when it was, but it was for, I can't remember which specific year, but it was for a Disneyland Paris anniversary. In fact, I think it may well have been 25. And I guess it's just kind of about my experiences with and kind of love of Disneyland Paris over the years. And I guess just about how, I suppose how the relationship has changed and how it's always been kind of a constant. So whereas maybe other things have changed, and there have been times where, when I was a teenager, things were a lot harder, or when I was a kid, things were a certain way. Or, I think it's focusing on that really. So it's quite long, and it doesn't rhyme, whereas obviously some of them do, and they're a little bit more jovial. This is probably more of a emotion fueled poem. But yeah, I'll read it now. When I was 6, I heard there was a place like nowhere, like nothing, and 4 went strolling hand in hand through pinks and golds and clouds and swells of music, smells and people always, crowds not like before. The images are hazy, but my favourite. When I was 11, I said I couldn't, I wouldn't. There wasn't anywhere the same. It had held onto my chest and something ached, and someone smiled and said, okay. We lived inside a forest. We walked inside a castle. For days inside my head was calmer. When I was 16, there were no windows and no doors. A low buzz, a hum, a throbbing shoulder from talking heads, a dread that wouldn't leave, but in the corner a piece of magic. I knew where to look, and we have to go. We have to go. Home sweet home the wrong way round. Sat on the doormat with the sun in my eyes. When I was 21, that mouse was family. Those lands were perfect. They lived in my brain and things were brighter. Popcorn, blisters, no use for dark eyes. Mascara disappeared with hot, happy tears. Hands held tight. He waved at me. He remembers me. When I was 24, I walked right in, like it was a familiar house without a scent. Nothing dulled it. I saw hugs last forever, tiny me in the mirror, and I wished for time to slow. Can your friends do this? I bet they can't. Mine think that it's odd. When I was 27, that ache came back. No, I lied because it never went away. My dreams are full of flying. I see London. It's a pirate's life for me. It's a small world after all. It's a thought that hits me in the stomach. This place is real. It exists. It's like nowhere. It's like nothing.
Sophie Jo, thanks for sharing with us on Dreamfinders.
All right, well, take care. It was great to speak to you.
And that's it for this episode of Dreamfinders. Thanks so much to Sophie Jo for being my guest. You can check out all her writing and buy her poetry book, Kids Grown Up, at sophiejowrites.com. That's SophieJo, WRITES.com. Our podcast artwork is provided by J.P. Tanner. Find his other work at tanwoodcreative.com. This podcast is distributed by WDW News Today, the worldwide leader in Disney Parks news. Read all they have to offer at WDWNT.com. Dreamfinders is hosted and produced by yours truly, Nathan Hartman, who you can follow on Twitter at SomeStuffIsaid. Tell your friends about the show, and please give us a rating on Apple Podcasts. It means a lot. Also, if you or someone else you know would be a great guest for this program, feel free to email us at dreamfinders@wdwnt.com. I'm Nathan Hartman, and remember, if we can dream it, then we can do it.